I'm reading Answer to Job by C.G. Jung. I'm reading paragraph 586. Whose words are without insight? Presumably Yahweh is not referring to the words of Job's friends, but is rebuking Job. But what is Job's guilt? The only thing he can be blamed for is his incurable optimism in believing that he can appeal to divine justice. In this he is mistaken, as Yahweh's subsequent words prove. God does not want to be just. He merely flaunts might over right. Job could not get that into his head because he looked upon God as a moral being. He had never doubted God's might, but had hoped for right as well. He had, however, already taken back his error when he recognized God's contradictory nature, and by so doing he assigned a place to God's justice and goodness. So one can hardly speak of a lack of insight. Paragraph 587. The answer to Yahweh's conundrum is therefore, it is Yahweh himself who darkens his own counsel and who has no insight. He turns the tables on Job and blames him for what he himself does. Man is not permitted to have an opinion about him, and in particular is to have no insight which he himself does not possess. For 71 verses, he proclaims his world-creating power to this miserable victim, who sits in ashes and scratches his swords with potsherds, and who, by now, has had more than enough of superhuman violence. Job has absolutely no need for being impressed by a further exhibition of this power. Yahweh, in his omniscience, could have known just how incongruous his attempts at intimidation were in such a situation. He could easily have seen that Job believes in his omnipotence as much as ever, and has never doubted it or wavered in his loyalty. Altogether, he pays so little attention to Job's real situation that one suspects him of having an ulterior motive, which is more important to him. Job is no more than the outward occasion for an inward process of dialectic in God. His thunderings at Job so completely miss the point that one cannot help but see how much he is occupied with himself. The tremendous emphasis he lays on his omnipotence and greatness makes no sense in relation to Job, who certainly needs no more convincing, but only becomes intelligible when aimed at a listener who doubts it. This doubting thought is Satan, who, after completing his evil handiwork, has returned to the paternal bosom in order to continue his subversive activity there. Yahweh must have seen that Job's loyalty was unshakable and that Satan had lost his bet. He must also have realized that, in accepting this bet, he had done everything possible to drive his faithful servant to disloyalty, even to the extent of perpetrating a whole series of crimes. Yet it is not remorse, and certainly not moral horror, that rises to his consciousness, but an obscure intimation of something that questions his omnipotence. He is particularly sensitive on this point because might is the great argument, but omniscience knows that might excuses nothing. The said intimation refers, of course, to the extremely uncomfortable fact that Yahweh had let himself be bamboozled by Satan. This weakness does not reach full consciousness, since Satan is treated with remarkable tolerance and consideration. Evidently, Satan's intrigue is deliberately overlooked at Job's expense. Paragraph 588. Luckily enough, Job had noticed during this harangue that everything else had been mentioned except his right. He has understood that it is at present impossible to argue the question of right, as it is only too obvious that Yahweh has no interest whatever in Job's cause, but is far more preoccupied with his own affairs. Satan, that is to say, has somehow to disappear, and this can best be done by casting suspicion on Job as a man of subversive opinions. The problem is thus switched on to another track, and the episode with Satan remains unmentioned and unconscious. To the spectator, it is not quite clear why Job is treated to this almighty exhibition of thunder and lightning, but the performance as such is sufficiently magnificent and impressive to convince not only a larger audience, but above all, Yahweh himself of his unassailable power. Whenever Job realizes what violence Yahweh is doing to his own omniscience by behaving like this, we do not know, but his silence and submission leave a number of possibilities open. Job has no alternative but formally to revoke his demand for justice, and he therefore answers in the words quoted at the beginning, "I lay my hand upon my mouth." Paragraph 589. He betrays not the slightest trace of mental reservation. In fact, his answer leaves us in no doubt that he has succumbed completely and without question to the tremendous force of the divine demonstration. The most exacting tyrant should have been satisfied with this and could be quite sure that his servant, from terror alone, to say nothing of his undoubted loyalty, would not dare to nourish a single improper thought for a very long time to come. Paragraph 590. Strangely enough, Yahweh does not notice anything of the kind. He does not see Job in his situation at all. It is rather as if he had another powerful opponent in the place of Job, one who was better worth challenging. This is clear from his twice-repeated taunt. Quote, "Gird up your loins like a man. I will question you, and you shall declare to me." There's a footnote, Job 38:3 and 47. Paragraph 591. One would have to choose positively grotesque examples to illustrate the disproportion between the two antagonists. Yahweh sees something in Job which he would not ascribe to him but to God. That is, an equal power which causes him to bring out his whole power apparatus and parade it before his opponent. Yahweh projects onto Job a skeptic's face, which is hateful to him because it is his own, and which gazes at him with an uncanny and critical eye. He is afraid of it, for only in face of something frightening does one let off a cannonade of references to one's power, cleverness, courage, invincibility, etc. What has all that to do with Job? Is it worth the lion's while to terrify a mouse? Paragraph 592. Yahweh cannot rest satisfied with the first victorious round. Job has long since been knocked out, but the great antagonist, whose phantom is projected onto the pitiable sufferer, still stands menacingly upright. Therefore Yahweh raises his arm again. Quote, "Will you even put me in the wrong? Will you condemn me that you may be justified? Have you an arm like God, and can you thunder with a voice like this?" Footnote, Job 40:8-9. Paragraph 593. Man, abandoned without protection and stripped of his rights, and whose nothingness is thrown in his face at every opportunity, evidently appears to be so dangerous to Yahweh that he must be battered down with the heaviest artillery. What irritates Yahweh can be seen from his challenge to the ostensible Job. Quote, Look on every one that is proud, and bring him low, and tread down the wicked where they stand. Hide them in the dust together, bind their faces in the hidden place. Then I will also acknowledge to you that your own right hand can give you victory. Footnote, Job 12-14. Quote, in the hidden place, unquote, is the Revised Standard Alternative reading for in the world below. Paragraph 594. Job is challenged as though he himself were a god. But in the contemporary metaphysics, there was no deuterus theos, no other god except Satan, who owns Yahweh's ear and is able to influence him. He is the only one who can pull the wool over his eyes, beguile him, and put him up to a massive violation of his own penal code. A formidable opponent indeed, and because of his close kinship, so compromising that he must be concealed with the utmost discretion, even to the point of God's hiding him from his own consciousness in his own bosom. In his stead, God must set up his miserable servant as the bugbear whom he has to fight, in the hope that by banishing the dreaded Countenance to a hidden place, he will be able to maintain himself in a state of unconsciousness. Paragraph 595. The stage managing of this imaginary duel, the speechifying and the impressive performance given by the prehistoric menagerie, would not be sufficiently explained if we tried to reduce them to the purely negative factor of Yahweh's fear of becoming conscious and of relativization, which this entails. The conflict becomes acute for Yahweh as a result of a new factor, which is, however, not hidden from omniscience, though in this case the existing knowledge is not accompanied by any conclusion. The new factor is something that has never occurred before in the history of the world, the unheard of fact that, without knowing it or wanting it, a mortal man is raised by his moral behavior above the stars in heaven, from which position of advantage he can behold the back of Yahweh, the abysmal world of shards. There's a footnote. The word shards is an allusion to an idea found in the later Kabbalistic philosophy. These shards, also called shells, form 10 counterpoles to the 10 Sephiroth, which are the 10 stages in the revelation of God's creative power. The shards, representing the forces of evil and darkness, were originally mixed with the light of the Sephiroth. The Zohar describes evil as the byproduct of the life process of the Sephiroth. Therefore, the Sephiroth had to be cleansed of the evil admixture of the shards. This elimination of the shards took place in what is described in the Kabbalistic writings, particularly of Loria and his school, as the breaking of the vessels. Through this, the powers of evil assumed a separate and real existence. See, for example, Sholem, Major Trends in Jewish Mysticism, page 267. Paragraph 596. Does Job know what he has seen? If he does, he is astute or canny enough not to betray it. But his words speak volumes. Quote, I know that thou canst do all things, and that no purpose of thine can be thwarted. There's a footnote. Job 42, 2. Paragraph 597. Truly, Yahweh can do all things, and permits himself all things without batting an eyelid. With brazen countenance he can project his shadow side. With brazen countenance he can project his shadow side and remain unconscious at man's expense. He can boast of his superior power and enact laws which mean less than air to him. Murder and manslaughter are mere bagatelle, and if the mood takes him, he can play the feudal grand seigneur and generously recompense his bondslave for the havoc wrought in his wheat fields. So you have lost your sons and daughters? No harm done. I will give you new and better ones. Paragraph 598. Job continues, no doubt with downcast eyes and in a low voice. Who is this that hides counsel without insight? Therefore I have uttered what I did not understand, things too wonderful for me, which I did not know. Hear, and I will speak. I will question you, and you declare to me. I had heard of thee by the hearing of the ear, but now my eye sees thee. Therefore I abhor myself and repent in dust and ashes. Paragraph 599. Shrewdly, Job takes up Yahweh's aggressive words and prostrates himself at his feet, as if he were indeed the defeated antagonist. Guileless as Job's speech sounds, it could just as well be equivocal. He has learnt his lesson well and experienced wonderful things which are none too easily grasped. Before he had known Yahweh by the hearing of the ear, but now he has got a taste of his reality, more so even than David, an incisive lesson that had better not be forgotten. Formerly he was naive, dreaming perhaps of a good God, or a benevolent ruler and just judge. He had imagined that a covenant was a legal matter and that anyone who was party to a contract could insist on his rights as agreed. That God would be faithful and true, or at least just, and, as one could assume from the Ten Commandments, would have some recognition of ethical values, or at least feel committed to his own legal standpoint. But to his horror, he has discovered that Yahweh is not human, but, in certain respects, less than human. That he is just what Yahweh himself says of Leviathan, the crocodile. He beholds everything that is high. He is king over all proud beasts. Footnote, Job 41:25.